The last of the cornmeal clung to the bowl in pale streaks, and I scraped at it as if patience alone might make more of it. The kettle muttered over a weak fire. Smoke from damp wood hung low in the kitchen with the thin sweetness of the last spoon of molasses. My children watched without whispering or asking how much there would be. That frightened me more than tears. Hunger had taught them silence, and silence in children is a hard thing to bear. I stirred hot water into the meal until it looked thicker than it was. Ben watched my hands from the table, serious and too thin for 12. Ruth sat beside him with one arm around Elsie, pretending not to notice how often I leaned over the pot to hide the bottom from them. Outside, a branch tapped the window in the March wind. Tap, tap, tap. "Is it ready, Mama?" Elsie whispered. "Near enough," I said, and filled the bowls in turn. Ben first, because a growing boy cannot live on promises. Ruth next, because she would have refused if I had left her for last. Elsie after that, because she always measured her portion against the others before trusting her own. When I tipped the pot for mine, only a thin ribbon slipped over the spoon and vanished. I set the pot down at once. Ruth looked up. She noticed everything now. "What about you?" she asked. "I ate while I was cooking," I said. It was easier to lie when the lie was useful. Ben said the blessing his father had taught him, his voice lower than it had been before winter. He thanked the Lord for food, for shelter, for keeping us together. At that, I had to look away. Keeping us together had become my whole life since Thomas died in February. I kept moving while they ate so they would not have to watch me not eat. The cupboard held half a jar of beans, a heel of salt pork, 2 soft onions, and a flour sack with more dust than flour. I had counted them 3 times that day. The numbers had not changed. Thomas's ledger lay by the lamp. Seed on credit, lamp oil on credit, medicine from the week before the fever took him. His hand stayed steady to the end, each figure written by a man who believed summer would come and he would meet it standing. Death had taken him and left me the sums. When the bowls were nearly clean, Ruth pushed hers away and said she was done. She was not. I made her finish it. Ben kept his eyes down. He had learned already that pity can shame a person more deeply than need. After supper, he said, "I can check the traps at first light, maybe set 2 more by the creek." "You have sums to do." "I can do both." There was no defiance in it. That made it worse. He was offering himself to the house, piece by piece. Elsie leaned against my skirt and asked, "Will we have biscuits when summer comes?" I smoothed her hair and said yes, because children will live on the promise of a season if you speak gently enough, and I could still give them that. When I tucked them into bed, the cold had sharpened. March nights seemed to wait until a body was tired, then slip through every crack in the house at once. I kissed Elsie, then Ruth, then sat beside Ben's cot when I saw his eyes still open in the dark. "Mama," he whispered, "we'll manage." He sounded so much like Thomas that for a second I could not breathe. "You needn't carry this with me," I said. "But you can't carry it alone," he answered. No child should know that. No child should be right. When they were asleep, I went back to the kitchen and sat at the table with the candle burning low. Thomas's chair stood across from me, just as it had the morning he first took to bed and never truly rose again. All winter, I had lived on stubbornness. I had mended, bargained, counted, smiled when the children watched, and buried fear under work. I had called that strength because I had not known what else to call it. But the truth sat plain in the room at last. There was almost no food left, and love alone could not fill the cupboard. I bowed my head and whispered, "I cannot do all of this alone." Enduring would not be enough anymore. That evening, the wind came off the thawing river with a wet chill that crept beneath the door and settled in my sleeves. I had mended Ben's cuff by lamplight, though my eyes kept drifting to the window whenever the dogs barked down the road. No one came to our house after dark unless there was trouble, death, or whiskey somewhere behind it. So when the knock came, 3 short raps and then a pause, I felt my whole body brace before I moved. Ben was up from the table at once. "Stay with your sisters," I told him, taking the lamp before he could argue. When I opened the door, Jack Mercer stood on the step with his hat in both hands and mud on his boots to the ankle. He owned the apple farm by the river, the one with the long, low barn and the tidy rows I had passed only twice. He was not a man given to wasted visits, and he did not look like a man who had come to offer pity. That alone made me more wary than if he had arrived with a basket and a long face. "Evening, ma'am," he said, and his voice was plain and steady, as if he had measured his words before stepping up. I held the door close to the frame so the heat would not go running out behind me. I asked what brought him there. He glanced once past my shoulder, not nosing into the room, just making sure the children were there and safe. Then he said he needed a capable woman at the farmhouse, now that his sister had gone east to her husband. Cooking, books, the orchard crews at noon, washing, ordering, and whatever else a place like that always breeds. He spoke of wages first, which startled me more than anything, because charity always begins with kindness and ends with shame. He said $12 a month, board for all 4 of us, and the little side room off the kitchen until we could do better. My fingers tightened on the lamp handle, though I kept my face still. No man had ever come to my door with an honest offer that did not ask for something crooked underneath. Perhaps he saw the suspicion in me, because he spared me the soft talk and said plainly that he was offering work, not rescue. "If you come," he said, "you come as my employee, and your children come because children belong with their mother." The words struck so deep I had to look down at the threshold boards to keep my eyes from betraying me. Safety had not sounded like a real word in my house for many weeks. I asked why he had thought of me, and he told me he had watched me at the mercantile keep a fair account when other people lost theirs. He said he had seen Ben lifting flour sacks at the store and Ruth minding Elsie without noise or fuss. "A family that knows how to work is worth more than a man too proud to say he needs help," he said. At that, I nearly laughed, because I had spent so long believing pride was the only thing still holding me up. Behind me, I heard Elsie laugh at something Ruth had whispered, and the sound of it moved through the dark room like a match taking flame. For one wild moment, I saw them under another roof, with enough bread, enough wood, and no creditor counting our grief against us. Then sense returned, and with it fear, because every road out of misery asks a toll before it lets you pass. I asked when he needed an answer. He said he would bring the wagon on Saturday if I wished it, and if I did not, he would say no more of it. No pressure, no hand laid where it had no right to be, no sermon about gratitude, only a choice set down plain between us. Jack Mercer nodded once, put his hat back on, and stepped into the dark as quietly as he had come. I barred the door and stood a long while without turning, listening to the children breathe and to the strange new beating in my chest. I had been enduring so long I had mistaken it for wisdom. But there in the lamplight, I began, against all habit, to wonder whether survival might ask more of a body than silence and grit. On Saturday, if I said yes, my children would ride toward a place I did not know, beside a man I barely knew, and still the thought of it felt less like surrender than standing still had begun to feel. For the first time since Thomas died, trust did not seem like weakness. It seemed like work then. Saturday broke gray and mild, with river fog lying low over the road and the yard gone soft underfoot. I had not slept much. Every board I packed seemed to ask whether I had lost my senses at last. Still, by dawn I had the children dressed, the bedding rolled, the kitchen things boxed, and Thomas's ledger wrapped in my shawl as carefully as if it were scripture. Ben carried more than I liked. Ruth tied jars in cloth so they would not knock together. Elsie trailed after us with her rag doll tucked under one arm and asked twice whether the apple trees were truly as many as people said. I told her she would soon see for herself. Jack came when he said he would, with a wide farm wagon, clean straw laid in the bed, and 2 blankets folded over the seat against the morning chill. He did not stand about making remarks on our poor belongings or our haste. He lifted the trunk, tested the loose wheel on my washstand, tightened it with a wrench from his pocket, and loaded everything as if work were simplest when done quietly. When Ben tried to shoulder the flour sack, Jack took the heavier end without a word and let the boy keep the lighter one, preserving his pride as neatly as if he had planned it on the drive over. I locked the house last. The key felt cold in my palm. For a moment I stood with my hand on the door, seeing the rooms as they had been before sickness, before debts, before I learned how loud want could be in an ordinary kitchen. Then Elsie called that she was ready, and there was nothing for it but to turn away. I tucked the key into my pocket and climbed to the wagon seat beside Jack. The children settled behind us among the bedding, and when the wheels finally rolled, I felt no lift of freedom, only a hard, strange looseness, as if something inside me had been untied too fast. The farm lay along the river on good dark ground, with rows of apple trees just beginning to show green at the tips and wet grass shining between them. The house was larger than ours had been, though plain, with a broad porch, a sound roof, and smoke coming steady from the kitchen chimney. The barn sat red and weathered beyond it, and farther off I saw the long lines of orchard stretching toward the water. It was no grand place. That comforted me. Grand places demand performance. This one looked built for use. Jack showed us the side room off the kitchen first. It held 2 narrow beds, a washstand, hooks by the wall, and one small window looking east. Ruth ran her finger along the sill and found no dust. Ben looked at the latch, the corners, the sturdiness of things. Elsie set her doll on the bed and smiled at once, which nearly undid me. A child will tell you faster than any grown person whether a room feels safe. By noon, I had tied up my sleeves and was in the kitchen because standing still would have been worse. The pantry was not rich, but it was honest. Flour in quantity, smoked ham, potatoes still firm from storage, dried apples, pickled beans, coffee, lard, onions strung from hooks, and 3 baskets of eggs cool from the spring room. I could have wept at the plain sight of enough. Instead, I made an inventory in my head, asked where the account books were kept, and set bread to rise before I had even taken off my bonnet. Jack brought the ledgers after dinner. They were in poor order, not from neglect exactly, but from a man who kept accounts only after every living thing had first taken its piece of him. Receipts were tucked into seed catalogs, wages noted in margins, apple sales listed by load in 2 different hands. I sat at the kitchen table while the children shelled peas by the door and began sorting the months into cents. Jack came in twice for water and once for twine. Each time he paused, saw what I was doing, and said only what answered the moment. That one belongs with March. The Harris crew was paid in cash. The river freight bill is missing its 2nd page. He did not hover. He helped where help was needed and went back to work. By the third evening, the children had found their own corner. Ben followed the hired men with his eyes and came home from the barn smelling of hay and harness. Ruth learned the pantry shelves in a day and had already set the crockery straighter than I would have managed myself. Elsie sat on the back step with a wind-fallen apple from last year, soft and brown but still sweet at the heart, and announced that the river sounded different here at night. She was right. It did. At our old place, dark had always seemed to press against the walls. Here it moved past, like water, carrying the day away. I was still wary. I did not mistake order for belonging, nor kindness for permanence. But when the pump handle rose easy under my hand, when bread baked in a warm kitchen, when I found the figures in the ledger beginning at last to line up beneath my pencil, I felt something quieter than hope and steadier than relief. I felt the first shape of a life that might hold. And Jack Mercer, with his plain voice and work-rough hands, went on proving himself the surest way a person can, not by promises, but by being there each time the day made a demand.